Hello and welcome to a story that will leave you speechless. At just 15, Carolyn Crouch believed she had found her fairy tale, a whirlwind romance with Babis Anagnostopoulos, a 27-year-old helicopter pilot. To the outside world, their love seemed perfect, but behind the scenes, something sinister was brewing. On May 11, 2021, their dream life turned into a horrific nightmare as a shocking murder rocked their home and deceived even the FBI. If you're intrigued by this twisted tale of love, lies, and betrayal, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on the full story. Stay tuned. In the early hours of May 11, 2021, a brutal home invasion in Glyka Nera, Athens, shattered the lives of 20-year-old Carolyn Crouch and her family. Caroline and her husband, Babis Anagnostopoulos, were asleep with their 11-month-old daughter nearby when three masked intruders broke into their home. The men, described by Babis as having Greek and Albanian accents, tied him up and demanded money, eventually discovering $10,000 hidden in a Monopoly game. Caroline, defenseless, was subjected to extreme violence as the intruders smothered her to death while her daughter watched. Babis, bound and powerless, could hear the attack but couldn't intervene. After the intruders fled, he managed to call emergency services using his nose, and police arrived to find the home ransacked and Carolyn's lifeless body beside her crying daughter. What initially appeared to be a violent robbery gone wrong soon sparked one of Greece's most infamous investigations, leading to shocking revelations that would turn the entire case upside down. The truth behind the tragedy would eventually expose far more than anyone could have imagined. Caroline Crouch was born on July 12, 2001, to a British father, David Crouch, a retired engineer, and a Filipino mother, Susan Della Costa. Raised in Athens, Caroline's early life took a significant turn when her family relocated to the beautiful island of Alonissos, one of Greece's scenic Sporades Islands, when she was just 8 years old. The move was inspired by her parents' love for the island's coastal beauty, and Alonissos became the backdrop for Caroline's childhood and teenage years. Life on the island shaped Caroline into an adventurous and free-spirited young woman. She developed a deep love for the ocean and quickly became passionate about scuba diving and swimming, embracing the beachside lifestyle that Alonissos offered. Friends and family remembered her as a vibrant, active girl who spent much of her time exploring the sea and its wonders. Her strong connection to nature and her love for water sports gave her a sense of freedom and happiness. In 2017, at the age of 15, Carolyn's life changed again when she met Babis Anagnostopoulos, a commercial helicopter pilot. They encountered each other during a Good Friday parade in Alonissos, and despite the age gap, Babis was 12 years older than her. The two quickly became inseparable. Carolyn was smitten by Babis, who seemed like the perfect romantic figure. A charming, successful man who swept her off her feet, even flying his helicopter over her school as a grand gesture of love. To a young Caroline, this was the stuff of dreams. Their relationship progressed rapidly, and despite the concerns of some due to Caroline's young age, the two eloped in 20 when Caroline turned 18. They married in a private ceremony in Portugal, opting for an intimate and non-traditional wedding away from the fanfare of a typical Greek ceremony. The couple presented a picture-perfect life, frequently sharing photos on social media of their travels, moments together, and their new life as a family. With their infant daughter arriving soon after the wedding, the couple seemed to be on the path to building a future together. They purchased a plot of land in the suburbs of Athens, with dreams of building a home where they could raise their family. For this, Caroline's parents contributed $50,000 to help their daughter and son-in-law with the purchase. This generous gift from her family was meant to help them lay the foundation for their dream home, a place where they could continue their fairy tale-like life together. In addition to this money, Carolyn and Babis had saved around $10,000 of their own, which they kept hidden inside their home for safekeeping. Given the unstable financial situation in Greece at the time, it was not uncommon for people to store large sums of money at home rather than trust the banks. Carolyn and Babis followed this practice, stashing their savings in an unconventional location, a Monopoly board game box. This money meant for their future home and life together would later play a pivotal role in the tragic events that unfolded. Despite the image of a blissful relationship that they projected to the world, cracks had begun to form beneath the surface. Carolyn, who was just stepping into adulthood, found herself increasingly isolated from her friends and family. Behind closed doors, their relationship was far from the dream she had once imagined. Babies had become controlling, and the couple often quarreled, with Caroline writing in her private diary about her doubts and frustrations. As her feelings of being trapped grew, so did her desire to leave. However, their dream of building a home and raising their daughter together continued to drive their decisions, even as the underlying tensions between them simmered. Little did anyone know that the life Caroline once envisioned with Babis would be shattered in the most unimaginable way. In the early hours of May 11, 2021, what seemed like a typical night for Caroline Crouch and Babis Anagnostopoulos quickly escalated into a nightmare. Three masked intruders broke into their home in Glyka Nera, Athens, seeking cash and valuables. The couple, along with their 11-month-old daughter, was asleep when the men entered the house, forcing their way through a basement window after disabling the security system. Babis was the first to wake, startled by the intruders, who immediately overpowered him. They bound his hands and feet with rope and covered his eyes and mouth with duct tape, rendering him helpless. Babis, terrified, could only hear the frantic cries of his wife and daughter as the masked men moved through the house. Their demands were clear. They wanted money. The intruders knew the couple had cash hidden in the house, likely due to Greece's ongoing financial instability, which had led many people to keep their savings at home rather than in banks. Babis, desperate to protect his family, quickly told them where the money was hidden. In an unusual hiding spot, the couple had stashed their $10,000 savings in a Monopoly board game box. This money, along with an additional $50,000 given by Caroline's parents for the couple's dream home, was their financial security for the future. The intruders found the Monopoly box and emptied it, taking the cash. But they didn't stop there. Despite having gotten what they came for, the men continued their search for more valuables, stealing jewelry and other items of worth from the house. Their greed and violence escalated as they became more agitated, demanding to know if there was anything else hidden in the house. Carolyn, who had been a fighter her entire life, both literally as a black belt in kickboxing and figuratively in the struggles of her young marriage, became the focus of the intruders' wrath. Bound and unable to defend herself, she pleaded with them to spare her family. But her cries for mercy were met with brutality. One of the men grabbed a pillow and, in an act of cold violence, smothered Caroline, ending her life. Their 11-month-old daughter was nearby, witnessing the horrific act. As this horrifying scene unfolded, Babis could hear his wife's struggles but was powerless to help. Blindfolded and tied up, he made desperate attempts to free himself, struggling against his restraints. The duct tape around his mouth and eyes, combined with the ropes around his body, made it nearly impossible to move. The situation became more dire as the ropes tightened around his neck, cutting off his air supply. Babis drifted in and out of consciousness, fainting from the lack of oxygen. The intruders, assuming they had left no witnesses, fled the scene after ransacking the house and murdering Carolyn. They left behind a house in ruins and a family broken beyond repair. When Babis finally regained consciousness, he was in a daze, his body weak from the struggle. But his mind was clear on one thing. He needed to call for help. Still bound and barely able to move, Babis managed to reach his mobile phone using only his nose. In a remarkable feat of survival, he dialed emergency services, muffling his words through the duct tape still covering his mouth. His pleas for help were garbled, but the message was clear. Intruders had broken into his home, and his wife was dead. After the violent robbery and murder at their home in Glyka Nera, Athens, Babis Anagnostopoulos managed to call emergency services despite being bound and gagged. Using his nose to dial the phone, he conveyed his distress through muffled words. His desperate plea for help alerted authorities, who rushed to the scene, arriving at the two-story maisonette around 6 a.m. What greeted the first responders was a horrific crime scene, one that would shock even the most seasoned investigators. Inside, the home was completely ransacked. Drawers were left wide open, their contents strewn across the floors. Personal belongings and clothes were scattered throughout the house, with signs of a violent struggle evident in every room. The family's Monopoly box, which had once held their $10,000 in savings, lay empty and discarded. But the chaos inside the home paled in comparison to the tragedy in the master bedroom. There on the bed lay the lifeless body of Caroline Crouch, face down and motionless. Just inches away from her, their 11-month-old daughter sat crying, still trying to wake her mother. Caroline had been brutally murdered, smothered to death by the intruders. Her pale skin and the marks on her body were clear evidence of the violent struggle she had endured. Babies himself was found on the floor of the bedroom, tied up and barely conscious. Duct tape covered his mouth, eyes, and neck, and his hands and feet were bound behind his back. He appeared to be in visible shock, still reeling from the terror of the night. First responders quickly freed him from his restraints, but his reaction to seeing his wife's lifeless body was one of utter devastation. The scene was further compounded by the discovery of the family's 7-month-old husky, Roxy. The intruders, in a chilling act of cruelty, had strangled the dog with its own leash and hung its body from the staircase. This senseless killing added another layer of brutality to an already horrific crime. As police began their initial investigation, the crime scene presented a number of disturbing clues. The methodical nature of the break-in, the targeting of the family's hidden savings, and the calculated violence suggested that the attack was not random. Investigators immediately suspected that this was the work of organized criminals, perhaps a gang familiar with the area or with connections to local crime syndicates. Babies told police that the intruders spoke with Greek and Albanian accents, which led authorities to believe that the crime may have been carried out by a group of experienced robbers, potentially tied to a network of organized crime. The fact that the attackers knew where the family's money was hidden further fueled speculation that someone within Babis and Caroline's inner circle may have tipped off the criminals. In the days following the crime, police began to piece together a timeline of events. They speculated that the intruders had staked out the couple's home and planned the attack, waiting for the right moment to strike. The precision with which the men broke into the house, neutralized the security system, and subdued the couple suggested that they were well prepared and familiar with such operations. As the investigation progressed, suspicions continued to mount about the true nature of the crime. Media reports speculated that this was not just a botched robbery, but a targeted attack on the young family. The fact that the intruders killed Caroline, despite having already obtained the money and valuables, raised troubling questions about their motivations. The police expanded their investigation, looking into local crime rings and reviewing recent break-ins in the surrounding area. They interviewed neighbors and combed through security camera footage from nearby homes and businesses. Additionally, they began questioning those close to Babis and Caroline, seeking any leads that might reveal how the attackers knew so much about the couple's financial situation and the layout of their home. However, despite the intensity of the investigation, concrete evidence remained elusive in those first days. No fingerprints or DNA were left behind at the scene, and the intruders had taken the memory card from the home's security camera, depriving police of crucial video footage. The only tangible clue was the description Babis had given of one of the intruders, based on a fleeting glimpse when the man's hood fell off during the struggle. As the investigation into the murder of Caroline Crouch unfolded, the tragic event gripped the entire nation. The brutal killing of a young mother in front of her child, combined with the apparent sophistication of the crime, left the public both outraged and terrified. Police efforts intensified, but what no one knew at the time was that the true story behind the murder was far more twisted and sinister than anyone could have imagined. In the wake of Caroline Crouch's brutal murder, Greek authorities launched an extensive investigation, exploring multiple theories about the nature of the crime and the identity of the intruders. Initially, police believed the attack to be the work of professional criminals, possibly connected to local organized crime. The violent yet calculated nature of the break-in, combined with the precision in which the intruders neutralized the couple and looted the house, pointed to experienced robbers who had executed similar crimes before. One of the key questions investigators grappled with was how the criminals knew about the couple's hidden cash. Given the economic instability in Greece at the time, many people stored large sums of money in their homes rather than in banks. But the fact that the intruders went straight for the monopoly box where the cash was stashed suggested they may have been tipped off by someone close to the couple. As a result, the police began scrutinizing Babis and Caroline's inner circle, questioning friends, family, and acquaintances for any potential links to the crime. At the same time, investigators considered whether Caroline's own actions during the attack may have contributed to the escalation of violence. Caroline was a black belt in kickboxing, a fact that raised doubts about her ability to resist the intruders and defend herself. This, combined with the signs of struggle on her body, led authorities to believe that she had fought back during the invasion, which might have prompted the attackers to resort to lethal force. Caroline's background as a fighter only deepened the mystery surrounding why the intruders killed her, as they had already obtained the money and valuables they had come for. The question remained, was her murder simply a result of her resistance, or was there a deeper, more personal motive? As police worked through various leads, speculation about the crime grew in both public and media circles. The savage nature of the attack, particularly the decision to kill Caroline despite the intruders seemingly having no further reason to harm her, fueled widespread theories. Media outlets across Greece were quick to label the crime as an act of cold-blooded professionals, but this narrative also came under scrutiny. Some media reports suggested that the criminals might have been under the influence of drugs, leading to erratic behavior and excessive violence during the robbery. Another popular theory was that Caroline had recognized one or more of the intruders, prompting them to kill her to eliminate any witnesses. This idea was bolstered by the fact that the couple lived in a relatively small community where locals might have known or at least recognized each other. Caroline's background as a martial artist, as well as her relatively young age and dynamic personality, only added to the intrigue surrounding the case. While the public fixated on these theories, the police worked diligently to gather evidence. They reviewed security footage from nearby homes and businesses, hoping to spot the intruders arriving or leaving the area. Their search led to the identification of a dark-colored vehicle and a motorcycle that had been seen cruising around the neighborhood on the morning of the murder. Investigators believed these could be linked to the criminals, but the footage was inconclusive, providing no clear leads as to the identity of the culprits. Amid the growing media frenzy, police spokespeople emphasized the complexity of the case. The crime, they said, was not a typical robbery gone wrong, but a well-planned, premeditated attack. The fact that no DNA or fingerprints were found at the scene indicated a level of professionalism and caution often associated with organized crime. As the investigation dragged on without clear answers, the media and public began to grow impatient. The brutal killing of a young mother in front of her child became a national tragedy, and the pressure on the authorities to solve the case mounted. However, as speculation continued to swirl around the identity and motive of the attackers, police began to focus on another key aspect of the crime, Baby's account of the events. While his initial statements seemed plausible, inconsistencies in his story, combined with new technological evidence, would soon unravel the case in ways no one could have predicted. The investigation was about to take a shocking turn, shifting the focus from the intruders to someone much closer to home. As the investigation into Caroline Crouch's murder deepened, Greek police initially focused on finding the professional criminals they believed were responsible for the violent home invasion. However, after weeks of dead ends and mounting frustration, investigators began to notice inconsistencies in Babis Anagnostopoulos' account of the events. His detailed narrative, once thought to be that of a devastated husband and victim, began to unravel as new evidence came to light, turning the investigation in a completely unexpected direction. The first signs of doubt arose when investigators revisited the timeline Babis had provided. He claimed that the intruders had entered the house through a basement window and disabled the security system, but further examination of the scene raised questions. The window was too small for a large man to enter, especially one with the build Babis had described. Moreover, no evidence pointed to forced entry through the rear door as initially suggested. Neighbors also began to cast doubts on Babis' version of events. He had stated that the house was violently ransacked and that Caroline had screamed as the intruders attacked her. However, no neighbors reported hearing anything that night, apart from the faint sounds of a barn in distress. This silence raised suspicions about whether the brutal attack had happened the way Babis had described it. The most significant breakthrough came through technology, specifically the data from Caroline's smartwatch and Babis' fitness app. Caroline's smartwatch, which tracked her heart rate, painted a different picture of the events on the night of her murder. The device showed that she had been asleep at 3:58 a.m., as her heart rate was normal and steady. However, by 4:05 a.m., her heart rate spiked dramatically, indicating extreme physical and emotional stress. Just a few minutes later, at 4:11 a.m., the data revealed that her heart had stopped. This timeline contradicted Babys's statement that the intruders had entered the house and killed Carolyn much later. Adding to the suspicion, data from Babys's fitness app showed that he had been moving around during the time he claimed to have been tied up by the intruders. His account of being restrained and drifting in and out of consciousness no longer held up under scrutiny, as the app indicated activity that was inconsistent with someone who was supposedly immobilized. Another crucial piece of evidence came from the family's home surveillance system. Babys had told police that the intruders had ripped the camera from the wall and removed the memory card after breaking into the house. However, the data from the system revealed that the memory card had been removed at 1:20 a.m., hours before Babys claimed the break-in occurred. This suggested that Babys had tampered with the system himself well before the alleged attack. As investigators pieced together the discrepancies in his story, the once grieving widower began to look more like a suspect. Police also uncovered evidence that Caroline had been planning to leave Babys. Text messages and phone records revealed that Caroline had been attempting to book a hotel room for herself and her daughter the night before her death, indicating that the couple had been in the midst of a serious argument. In her diary, Carolyn had written about their tumultuous relationship and Babys's controlling behavior, expressing doubts about whether she could continue living with him. Faced with overwhelming evidence, the police confronted Babys during a memorial service for Caroline on June 17, 2021, just over a month after her murder. Under the weight of the new findings, Babys's narrative collapsed. He was taken into custody for further questioning, and during the interrogation, he confessed to the crime. Babys admitted that there had never been a break-in and that he had staged the robbery to cover up his involvement in Caroline's murder. According to his confession, the couple had argued on the night of May 10th, with Caroline threatening to leave him and take their daughter. In a fit of rage, Babys lost control and smothered her with a pillow while she was lying in bed. After realizing what he had done, Babys panicked and devised an elaborate plan to make it appear as though intruders had broken into their home, killed Caroline, and robbed them. In an attempt to sell his fabricated story, Babys strangled the family's dog, Roxy, to make the crime scene more convincing. He tied himself up, damaged the house to simulate a robbery, and removed the memory card from the security camera. Believing he could outsmart the police, he called emergency services and played the role of the grieving husband, hoping to shift the blame onto fictional criminals. However, Babys's plan unraveled under the scrutiny of forensic evidence, technology, and his own conflicting statements. The truth emerged, revealing that the man who had portrayed himself as a victim had in fact been the perpetrator all along. His confession sent shockwaves through Greece and beyond, as the true story of Caroline's tragic death came to light, leaving the nation to grapple with the devastating reality of her murder. After weeks of playing the role of the grieving husband, Babys Anagnosopoulos finally broke down under the pressure of mounting evidence and confessed to murdering his wife, Carolyn Crouch. During the police interrogation on June 17, 2021, Babys admitted to suffocating Caroline in their bedroom after an intense argument. According to his confession, the couple had been fighting, and Caroline had once again threatened to leave him, take their daughter, and walk out of the toxic marriage. Babys, feeling powerless and frustrated, lost control in a moment of rage. He explained to the authorities that he felt he had no other choice when Caroline threw their 11-month-old daughter into her crib and demanded that he leave the house. Overcome with anger, Babys grabbed a pillow and smothered her to death. In a panic after realizing what he had done, Babys quickly devised a plan to stage the murder as a robbery gone wrong. He tied himself up, blindfolded himself with duct tape, and ransacked their home to make it look like it had been looted. He killed their family dog, Roxy, by hanging her with her own leash, hoping to make the crime scene appear even more convincing. Babys then called emergency services, using his nose to dial the phone, and spun a tale of masked intruders breaking into their house, killing his wife, and robbing them. For 37 days, Babys successfully fooled the world, portraying himself as a heartbroken husband. He attended Caroline's funeral, gave tearful interviews, and even took to social media to thank the public for their support. However, his confession shattered the facade he had so carefully constructed. The shocking revelation that Babis himself had murdered Caroline sent ripples of outrage and disbelief through Greek society. The public, who had rallied behind Babis as the victim of a horrific crime, felt deeply betrayed. News of his confession dominated headlines, with many questioning how he had managed to deceive not only the public but also the police and media for so long. Caroline's family, especially her father, David Crouch, was devastated by the truth. They had believed Babis' story and mourned Caroline's death while offering support to him. The realization that the man they had trusted and welcomed into their family was responsible for Caroline's death added an unbearable layer of pain to their grief. Caroline Crouch's life, though tragically short, was one filled with vibrant energy and passion. She was a young woman with dreams, a love for the ocean, and a bright future ahead. Yet beneath the surface of her seemingly happy marriage, she faced manipulation and control from a husband who would ultimately take her life. Babis and Agnostopoulos had not only controlled Caroline throughout their relationship, but in his final act, he sought to manipulate the narrative surrounding her death, fooling the world for more than a month. Babis' downfall was swift once the evidence began to contradict his fabricated story. His attempts to stage the crime as a robbery fell apart under the scrutiny of modern technology, with the data from Caroline's smartwatch and his own fitness app exposing the lies in his account. Despite his best efforts to mislead investigators, the truth emerged, showing that even the most elaborate deceptions can be unraveled by science and persistence. The case had a profound impact on Greek society, raising awareness about domestic violence and the dangers of controlling relationships. Many question how such a crime could have gone unnoticed for so long, and the public was forced to confront uncomfortable truths about manipulation, power dynamics, and violence within seemingly perfect relationships. Caroline's murder sparked conversations about the need for greater protections for victims of domestic abuse and emphasized the importance of paying attention to warning signs before such tragedies occur. Babis and Agnostopoulos, who had fooled the world, and even the FBI with his carefully crafted lies, was eventually exposed as the killer. His downfall serves as a reminder that no matter how skillfully one may manipulate the truth, justice has a way of catching up. In the end, the case of Caroline Crouch is not just a story of a crime, but a cautionary tale about the perils of control, deception, and unchecked rage in relationships, and it stands as a sobering reminder of the lives destroyed by domestic violence. Thank you for joining us in uncovering this tragic and shocking story. If you're interested in more captivating true crime cases, mysteries, and deep dives into real-life events, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Stay tuned, as there's always more to uncover. On the morning of December 11th, 2023, a shocking discovery was made in a Las Vegas apartment complex when Marvin Patterson's brother visited his home. Inside, he found the bodies of 5 family members: Shannara Patterson, Marvin's wife, and their 3 children, ages 6 to 14. All were fatally shot, leaving a gruesome scene that would haunt the local community. Marvin Patterson, the father, had carried out the unthinkable, taking the lives of his wife and children before turning the gun on himself. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police arrived shortly after, confirming the tragic deaths. The case sent shockwaves across the city and raised chilling questions about what led to this horrific event. Shannara Patterson, a loving mother and respected entrepreneur, had trusted her husband, but the tragic result of that trust would devastate her family and leave a community searching for answers. Shannara Patterson was born on December 10, 1989, in Long Beach, California. She spent her early years in California, where she grew up surrounded by family and friends who described her as loving, kind, and compassionate. As an adult, she eventually moved to Las Vegas, Nevada, where she established a life for herself and her 3 children, Keziah, Derek Jr., and Zemira. Shannara was a dedicated mother, and her children were her top priority. She worked hard to provide them with a stable and nurturing home, making sure they were always well taken care of, both physically and emotionally. As a mother, Shannara was deeply involved in her children's lives, ensuring they were happy, healthy, and thriving. Her 3 children were her pride and joy, and she was known for always making sure they were well-dressed and presentable. Whether at school or at home, Shannara's children reflected the care and attention she devoted to them. Those who knew her often commented on her devotion to motherhood and her efforts to provide a good life for her family in Las Vegas. In her 34 years of life, Shannara had built a strong foundation as both a mother and a professional, living a life that seemed full of promise and love before it was tragically cut short. Shannara Patterson's relationship with Marvin Patterson began as a love story that seemed destined for happiness. After meeting and falling in love, the two quickly grew close, and in May 2019, they were married in a beautiful ceremony in Las Vegas. It was a moment of joy for Shannara, who expressed deep love and gratitude for Marvin. She believed she had found a partner who would stand by her and support her through life's ups and downs. In their wedding website, Shannara openly thanked God for bringing Marvin into her life, describing him as someone who appreciated and loved her and never made her feel small. The wedding was a grand affair, with Shannara's father walking her down the aisle in what would be one of his final significant acts as he passed away shortly after the wedding. Marvin and Shannara's marriage also created a blended family, as Shannara had two children from a previous relationship, Keziah, 14, and Derek Jr., 11, while Marvin had two children from his prior marriage. Despite his divorce just a month before marrying Shannara, Marvin seemed to embrace his role as a stepfather to her children. Together, they welcomed their own child, Zymira, born in 2017, solidifying the bonds of their new family. From the outside, the Patterson family appeared to be a picture of unity and love. Marvin took on the role of a father figure to Shannara's older children, and they seemed to have a harmonious household. Family and friends saw them frequently together, whether in public or through social media posts, where they often shared happy moments, family outings, and milestones. As a couple, Marvin and Shannara projected a sense of stability and happiness. Their love story, blended family, and shared life together gave the impression that they had overcome their pasts and built something beautiful. However, beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect life, darker issues were festering that would eventually lead to a devastating and tragic end for their entire family. Shannara Patterson was a successful cosmetologist known for her expertise in braiding and wig installations, particularly among women of color. She built a strong client base through her skill and warm personality, earning a reputation as a trusted stylist in her community. As an entrepreneur, Shannara took great pride in her work, balancing her business with being a dedicated mother to her three children. Her personal style was reflected in her family, with her children always well-dressed and presentable, showcasing her care and attention to detail. Shannara's ability to manage both her career and family life gave the impression of a woman who had everything under control: a loving mother, a successful businesswoman, and a supportive wife. She worked hard to provide for her family while maintaining a close bond with her children. Though her life appeared stable and fulfilling, hidden issues within her family would later lead to a devastating tragedy. Marvin Patterson stepped into the role of a stepfather to Shannara's two older children, Keziah and Derek Jr., after their marriage in 2019. From the outside, he appeared to embrace this responsibility, presenting himself as a caring and involved father figure. Marvin treated the children as his own, while also raising his biological daughter, Zymira, with Shannara. Family and friends saw Marvin's involvement in the children's lives as positive, and there were no immediate signs of tension or trouble. He participated in family activities and helped create the appearance of a stable and loving blended family. However, despite this outward image, there were dark aspects to Marvin's life that would eventually surface, leading to unimaginable consequences for the family. In October 2022, the dark and deeply troubling side of Marvin Patterson came to light when he was arrested and charged with 9 felonies, all involving serious offenses against children. The charges were extensive and included 5 counts of lewd acts with a child under the age of 4, 2 counts of assault on a minor under the age of 16, 1 count of lewd conduct with a minor, and 1 count of first-degree kidnapping of a child. These allegations spanned a 9-year period from 2013 to 2022 and cast a disturbing shadow over Marvin's character, particularly given that he was living in a household with Shannara's 3 children, including her 14-year-old daughter, Keziah. The charges came as a shock to those who knew Marvin, as there had been no previous signs of criminal behavior. On the surface, he had appeared to be a loving husband and caring stepfather. However, the severity of the accusations indicated a deeply concealed, darker nature. The victims in the case were believed to be young girls who had at one point lived in or been associated with the same apartment complex as Marvin and his family. The revelation of these charges raised immediate concerns about the safety of Shanara's children, particularly Keziah, who was living under the same roof as Marvin. Following his arrest, Marvin's bail was initially set at $100,000, a figure reflecting the gravity of the crimes he was accused of. This high bail amount was intended to ensure that he remained in custody, given the serious nature of the charges and the potential danger he posed to minors. In addition to the bail amount, several strict conditions were imposed to further limit any risk to the community. Marvin was required to surrender his passport to prevent any attempts to flee the country, and he was prohibited from having any contact with minors under the age of 18, including his own children and stepchildren. However, despite the significant charges, Marvin's financial situation became a key issue in the case. Unable to afford the $100,000 bail, he remained in jail for 2 months while awaiting his next hearing. During this time, his attorney, Brett Whipple, worked diligently to have Marvin's bail reduced. The defense argued that the initial bail amount was unreasonable and financially out of reach for Marvin, a man supporting a family of 5. In their motion to the court, they requested a more reasonable bail amount and insisted that Marvin posed no flight risk, especially since he had already surrendered his passport. In December 2022, the presiding judge, Diana Sullivan, reviewed the motion to reduce Marvin's bail. During the hearing, Marvin's defense team made several key arguments to support their case. They claimed that the state had presented insufficient evidence to justify the serious charges against Marvin, particularly the lewd conduct and kidnapping accusations. Furthermore, Marvin's family and friends, including his brother and wife Shanara, testified on his behalf, vouching for his character and emphasizing that he was a responsible father and husband. They argued that Marvin had always been present for his children and had shown no signs of dangerous behavior. Despite the serious nature of the allegations, the judge ultimately decided to reduce Marvin's bail from $100,000 to $10,000, a significant decrease. This decision allowed Marvin to post bail and return home under certain conditions. While he was placed on house arrest and required to wear an electronic monitoring device, the reduction in bail opened the door for him to resume his life outside of jail, albeit under close supervision. Additionally, the conditions of his release required that he live separately from Shanara and her children, given the accusations against him involving minors. He was prohibited from coming into contact with anyone under the age of 18, a restriction aimed at protecting his stepchildren and the community at large. This decision would later be seen as a catastrophic failure in the legal system. Though the court imposed monitoring conditions, the reduced bail allowed Marvin the freedom to continue living his life outside of jail, despite the ongoing criminal case against him. Shanara, believing in Marvin's innocence and trusting in their marriage, continued to support him throughout the legal process. However, the decision to release Marvin on such a low bail amount, despite the serious charges, set the stage for the unimaginable tragedy that would unfold months later. In retrospect, the reduction of Marvin's bail from $100,000 to $10,000 would be heavily criticized. Advocates and community members would argue that he should have remained in jail for the safety of his family and others. While his case remained pending, the true extent of the danger he posed was tragically revealed when Marvin returned home and less than a year later committed the horrific crime of killing his family and himself. The decision to reduce his bail ultimately allowed a man facing serious child abuse allegations to return to his home and to the very children he would later harm. After Marvin Patterson's release on a reduced $10,000 bail in December 2022, he was placed under house arrest and fitted with an electronic monitoring device. Despite being charged with serious crimes involving children, he was allowed to return home under the condition that he live separately from Shanara and her children. The court had prohibited him from being near minors, including his stepchildren, to ensure their safety. However, this restriction proved difficult to enforce, as Shanara continued to believe in Marvin's innocence and did not view him as a threat to her family. Financial stress began to mount in the months following Marvin's release. The couple faced significant financial challenges, particularly after their eviction from their rented home in Las Vegas in November 2023. Struggling to keep up with rent payments, Shannara and the children moved back in with Marvin, despite the court's conditions prohibiting him from being around minors. Shannara's belief in Marvin's innocence led her to make this decision, ignoring the legal restrictions meant to protect her family. The financial pressures further escalated as Marvin's car was on the verge of being repossessed, adding to the strain. The family, now back under one roof, was dealing with the emotional and financial burdens of their situation. Marvin's growing frustration with their circumstances likely contributed to his deteriorating mental state. The inability to maintain a stable home, coupled with his pending criminal charges, placed immense pressure on the family, setting the stage for the tragic events that would follow. Marvin's inability to meet these mounting challenges appeared to drive him to a breaking point. His frustration with his personal and financial struggles, compounded by the fear of losing everything, led to a devastating escalation. The decision to return to live with Shannara and the children, despite court orders, would ultimately have fatal consequences. On the night of December 10, 2023, just one day after Shannara Patterson celebrated her 34th birthday, tragedy struck the Patterson household. Marvin Patterson, overwhelmed by a financial strain, his deteriorating mental state, and the weight of his legal troubles, reached a breaking point. In a horrifying act of violence, he turned a gun on his family. Marvin fatally shot his wife, Shannara, and their three children, 14-year-old Keziah, 11-year-old Derek Shemedet Jr., known as DJ, and 6-year-old Myra. After murdering his family, Marvin turned the gun on himself, ending his life in the same apartment where they all lived. The next morning, on December 11, 2023, Marvin's brother, Jason Patterson, became concerned after receiving troubling messages from Marvin. He decided to check on him at his apartment. When Jason arrived, he was met with a nightmare. He found the bloodied bodies of his brother, sister-in-law, and their children. The scene was gruesome and shocking, with all 4 family members appearing lifeless. In a state of panic, Jason frantically called 911, begging for help. In his 911 call, Jason described the horrifying discovery and mentioned that one of the children, DJ, was still faintly breathing. He pleaded for medical assistance, hoping that his nephew could be saved. Emergency services arrived at the scene, and while Shannara, Keziah, and Myra were pronounced dead on arrival, DJ was found alive but critically injured. He had suffered severe gunshot wounds but miraculously survived the massacre. DJ was immediately rushed to the University Medical Center, CIRMC, in Las Vegas, where doctors worked to stabilize him. Although he survived the physical trauma of the attack, the emotional and psychological scars left by witnessing and experiencing the brutal murders of his family would stay with him forever. DJ's survival became the only glimmer of hope in an otherwise devastating tragedy. In the aftermath of the tragic murders, there was widespread speculation about Marvin Patterson's mental state. Many believed that Marvin had been battling depression and mounting frustration due to the financial strain on his family, the looming repossession of his car, and the eviction from their home. Coupled with the serious legal charges he faced, these stresses likely contributed to his mental breakdown, culminating in the horrific act of violence against his own family. The sudden and brutal nature of the crime shocked both those who knew the Pattersons and the larger Las Vegas community. Public outrage quickly followed, particularly directed at the legal system. The decision to reduce Marvin's bail from $100,000 to $10,000 came under heavy scrutiny. Many criticized the judge who made the decision, arguing that Marvin should have remained in jail, especially given the severity of the charges against him involving child abuse. Activists, community leaders, and legal experts questioned how someone facing such serious accusations could be allowed out on bail, effectively returning to a home where minors were present. Some felt that this decision directly led to the tragic outcome, as it allowed Marvin the opportunity to commit the murders. The funerals of Shannara Patterson and her 2 daughters, Keziah and Myra, were heart-wrenching events that drew hundreds from the community. Held at a chapel in Las Vegas, the service was filled with grief as family, friends, and neighbors gathered to mourn the senseless loss of life. Heartfelt tributes were shared, with loved ones remembering Shannara as a devoted mother and her daughters as bright, loving children with promising futures. The sense of shock and sorrow was palpable as the community struggled to come to terms with the tragedy. DJ, the sole survivor of the attack, faced an uphill battle for recovery. His physical injuries were severe, but the emotional and psychological trauma he endured was equally devastating. DJ, having witnessed the murder of his mother and siblings, was left to grapple with unimaginable pain. In response, family and friends set up a GoFundMe campaign to help cover the costs of DJ's medical care, ongoing therapy, and recovery expenses. At the time of the fundraising efforts, the community rallied around DJ, offering support and donations, though the financial goal had yet to be fully met. As the community mourned the loss of Shanara and her daughters, many called for reforms in the legal system to prevent such tragedies from occurring again. The case sparked deeper conversations about mental health, judicial accountability, and the protective measures in place for families at risk. DJ's survival stood as a small beacon of hope in a dark time, but the path ahead for him and his family would be long and difficult. The tragedy of Shanara Patterson and her children's deaths leaves many lingering questions, particularly whether the murders could have been prevented if Marvin Patterson's bail had remained set at $100,000. Given the serious charges he faced, multiple felonies involving offenses against children, the initial high bail amount was meant to keep him in custody and away from his family, especially his stepchildren. Reducing the bail to $10,000 allowed Marvin to return home, despite restrictions and monitoring conditions that ultimately proved ineffective in protecting the family. Had Marvin remained in jail, it's likely this horrific chain of events would have been avoided. His mental state, compounded by financial stress and legal troubles, deteriorated after his release. The financial burden of trying to maintain a separate residence, combined with the emotional weight of the accusations against him, may have contributed to his fatal decision to take his own life and those of his family. The fact that Marvin was allowed to return to a home where minors lived, despite the restrictions imposed by the court, raises serious questions about the system's ability to protect vulnerable families. Critics argue that if the court had upheld the higher bail amount, Marvin would not have had the opportunity to commit these murders. His incarceration would have kept him away from his wife and children, possibly giving the family time and space to process the situation and seek safety. The failure to recognize the potential danger Marvin posed, despite the serious charges against him, reflects a broader issue within the justice system, balancing individual rights with public safety. Ultimately, while it is impossible to know for certain whether this tragedy could have been completely avoided, keeping Marvin in jail would have drastically reduced the risk of such a devastating outcome. The case serves as a painful reminder of the importance of stricter safeguards when dealing with individuals accused of serious crimes, especially those that involve children and vulnerable family members. The funeral services for Shanara and her daughters were attended by many from the community, reflecting the deep impact the tragedy had on those who knew them. It was a moment of collective mourning as people came together to honor the lives lost and show solidarity with the surviving family. The emotional and financial support offered by the community provided a crucial lifeline for the family in their darkest time, helping them navigate the overwhelming grief and trauma caused by the tragedy. In the face of such an unimaginable loss, the Las Vegas community showed how important collective support can be in helping families like Shanara's begin the long road to healing. Though the wounds left behind may never fully heal, the outpouring of love and assistance helped to ease the burden and provided DJ and his remaining family members with some measure of hope for the future. This case has highlighted flaws in the bail system, prompting demands for reform, including more rigorous evaluations of defendants in serious cases and better enforcement of court restrictions. There are also calls for the judge who reduced Marvin's bail to be held accountable, with advocates pushing for greater transparency and responsibility in judicial decisions to prevent future tragedies. As we come to the end of this heartbreaking story, we invite you to share your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. What do you think could have been done differently in this case? Could stronger legal actions have prevented this tragedy? Your insights and opinions matter, and they may offer valuable perspectives to others who are grappling with similar issues. Let's continue the conversation and raise awareness so that together we can help prevent such tragedies in the future. Thank you for watching, And don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories. In October 2019, a missing person report shook the quiet town of Columbia, Missouri, when Joseph alleged, a young husband and father, reported his wife, Mengqi Ji, had mysteriously vanished. What started as a routine investigation quickly spiraled into a harrowing tale of secrets, suspicions, and tragedy. Mengqi's sudden disappearance, leaving behind her child and personal belongings, hinted at something far darker lurking beneath the surface. As the investigation unfolded, authorities would uncover shocking truths that turned this case into one of the most chilling mysteries in recent history. Joseph alleged, a 26-year-old man from Columbia, Missouri, became the focus of a highly publicized investigation following the disappearance of his wife, Mengqi Ji, in October 2019. Originally from Kansas, Joseph met Mengqi while attending the University of Missouri. He was known by acquaintances as quiet and somewhat introverted, leading what appeared to be a normal life with his wife and their young daughter. However, beneath the surface, there were signs of tension in their marriage. Reports from friends and family indicated that Joseph had a controlling nature, and there were allegations of emotional abuse within the relationship. Despite this, Joseph initially presented himself as cooperative during the investigation into Mengqi's disappearance, even suggesting that she had left voluntarily. He claimed that Mengqi might have been involved in an affair, which he believed could explain her departure. As the case progressed, more disturbing details about Joseph began to emerge, particularly after the discovery of Mengqi's body. Evidence suggested that Joseph had been involved in her death and had taken steps to cover it up. His actions after her disappearance, including disposing of her body and attempting to mislead investigators, ultimately led to his arrest and trial. This case revealed a darker, more sinister side to Joseph Elledge, whose behavior and actions shocked those who knew him and left a lasting impact on the community. When Joseph Elledge first reported his wife Mengqi Ji missing, the case was treated as a typical missing person investigation. Officer Joseph arrived at the Elledge residence to conduct a brief examination, trying to piece together the events that led up to Mengqi's sudden disappearance. What immediately struck the officer was the collection of personal items Mengqi had left behind, most notably her cell phone and wedding ring. Both were lying on a table in plain sight, raising questions about what might have prompted her to leave them behind. For a woman to abandon such significant belongings, particularly her phone, suggested that her departure may have been more abrupt than a simple walk away from home. The officer made careful observations throughout the house, noting that there were no immediate signs of a struggle. The scene at first glance appeared calm and ordinary, except for the missing person at the center of it all. Joseph seemed cooperative, offering information as the officer began his inquiry. He told the officer that Mengqi had taken only her purse and possibly her black Nike shoes, leaving behind not only her daughter, but also the keys to her car, which were found in their usual spot in the kitchen. This added to the mystery, as her car was still parked in the driveway. Joseph then led the officer to an iPad that belonged to Mengqi. He explained that he had looked through the device to find clues about her whereabouts. While searching, Joseph claimed to have stumbled upon a journal-like document in which Mengqi confided details of a secret affair. The journal, according to Joseph, mentioned a man living in Shanghai, China, who Mengqi had allegedly been in contact with. Joseph asserted that this might explain why she had left. She was emotionally invested in this other man. The idea of Mengqi carrying on a secret relationship while remaining married and caring for their child painted a complex picture of her life that was unknown to her family and friends. As Officer Joseph reviewed the details, the journal's revelation of an affair naturally deepened the investigation. Joseph told the officer that he had even messaged the man Mengqi mentioned and claimed the man was currently in China. The timing of Mengqi's disappearance and her alleged involvement with a man overseas raised questions. Could she have planned to leave the country to be with him? Had her departure been planned, or had something more sinister happened before she had a chance to act? The officer noted Joseph's calm demeanor as he recounted these details, but something seemed off. While the journal entry suggested a possible motive for Mengqi leaving, her sudden disappearance, leaving behind her child, vehicle, and essential items like her phone, cast doubt on the idea of her departure being voluntary. It became increasingly clear that the investigation would need to go beyond the house and into the personal lives of both Mengqi and Joseph. Authorities began looking into Mengqi's digital footprint, seeking any signs of flight bookings, financial transactions, or communication with the man in Shanghai. However, their search turned up empty. There were no records to suggest that Mengqi had planned any immediate travel or that she had prepared for a sudden departure. Her phone, locked and inaccessible without a passcode, added to the difficulty of the investigation, leaving many questions unanswered. Despite the discovery of the journal and Joseph's insistence on Mengqi's secret love life, the officer's instincts signaled that there was more to this story than a wife simply leaving her home and family. The investigation into Mengqi Ji's disappearance had only just begun, and as more details would emerge, it became evident that the truth was far darker than anyone could have imagined. As the investigation into Mengqi Ji's disappearance progressed, Joseph Elledge began to recount a series of suspicious events that painted a more complicated picture of their relationship in the months leading up to her disappearance. These strange occurrences, according to Joseph, suggested that Mengqi's behavior had become increasingly unusual and secretive, leaving him puzzled and concerned. Joseph told investigators about multiple occasions when Mengqi left the house for extended periods without providing a clear explanation for where she was going or why she was gone for so long. One particularly bizarre incident stood out to Joseph, which he shared with the officers in detail. He recalled a time when Mengqi had told him she was going outside to retrieve something from her car. He didn't think much of it at first, but after about 45 minutes, she still hadn't returned. Joseph admitted that he began to worry, wondering why it was taking her so long to come back inside. When Mengqi finally returned, she was holding a pair of pliers that she claimed to have retrieved from the car. Joseph said the tool had likely been in the vehicle for 2 years, and the whole situation struck him as odd. Why would she spend nearly an hour outside just to bring back something so trivial? Despite pressing her for more information, Mengqi insisted that the pliers were the reason she had gone to the car, and she offered no further explanation. This strange episode only added to Joseph's growing suspicions about his wife's behavior. Joseph then recounted the events of the night Mengqi went missing. According to his account, he had gone to bed as usual, and everything seemed normal. However, when he woke up around 5 a.m., he was immediately struck by Mengqi's absence. He told investigators that he initially assumed she might be in the room with their daughter, Anna, who had been crying that morning. However, when he went to check on their child, Mengqi wasn't there either. Panic began to set in as Joseph searched the house, calling out her name and looking for any signs of where she might have gone. That was when he realized Mengqi's purse and her black Nike shoes were also missing. This was unusual for her, he noted, as she rarely left the house so early in the morning, especially without telling him where she was going. Joseph described the scene to investigators, emphasizing that nothing else seemed out of place in the home. Mengqi's car keys were still in their usual spot, her car was still parked outside, and other personal belongings remained untouched. This suggested that if she had left, it was on foot, which added to the mystery, given the early hour and the fact that she hadn't mentioned any plans to leave. Adding to the intrigue, Joseph mentioned that Mengqi had been acting distant and withdrawn in the months before her disappearance. He noted that while they had some disagreements, mostly over minor issues like renewing their daughter's Medicaid, there were no major fights or confrontations that would have led her to leave suddenly. Still, the extended absences and strange behavior, like the incident with the pliers, left Joseph wondering if there was more going on than he was aware of. As the investigation continued, these suspicious events raised questions about what had really happened to Mengqi Ji. Did she leave voluntarily, or was there something more sinister at play? Joseph's accounts of her behavior seemed to hint at deeper issues within their relationship, but without concrete evidence, authorities could only speculate about the true nature of Mengqi's disappearance. Each new detail, however minor, added to the growing tension surrounding the case, and it became increasingly clear that uncovering the truth would require a deeper look into both Joseph and Mengqi's lives. In his testimony to the police, Joseph Elledge emphasized that his relationship with Mengqi Ji hadn't been marked by major arguments or dramatic conflicts. According to him, their disagreements were minor, typical of what any married couple might experience. He described these disputes as small and inconsequential, downplaying any suggestion that there had been serious trouble between them. One of the most recent disagreements Joseph mentioned to the investigators involved their daughter, Anna, and her Medicaid coverage. Joseph explained that Mengqi had become anxious when she realized Anna's Medicaid was about to expire. As a responsible parent, Mengqi wanted to make sure everything was in order for their daughter's health care, especially with a doctor's appointment coming up. She had been stressed about the situation, pressuring Joseph to take action and get the Medicaid renewed as soon as possible. Joseph admitted that this had caused some friction between them. While Mengqi was insistent about resolving the issue, Joseph confessed that he wasn't as familiar with the Medicaid process as Mengqi had handled it the first time. He recalled how Mengqi had grown increasingly irritated with him because he didn't have all the necessary information to complete the renewal. He explained that her frustration was understandable, given her concerns for their daughter's health, but he characterized the disagreement as relatively minor and typical of parental responsibilities. Joseph stressed that while these small disputes arose, there was nothing that would have driven Mengqi to leave or suggest deeper problems in their marriage. He claimed their relationship, though perhaps not perfect, was not troubled by any serious or unresolved issues. In his narrative, Mengqi's stress over their daughter's Medicaid renewal was the most recent point of tension, but Joseph insisted that it wasn't something that would lead to her disappearance. This testimony, however, seemed to contrast with other findings during the investigation, suggesting that the situation between Joseph and Mengqi may have been more complex than he was willing to admit. During a media interview following Mengqi Ji's disappearance, Joseph alleged presented a public image of a concerned husband, expressing his deep love and admiration for his wife. Speaking to the press, Joseph emphasized Mengqi's strength, dedication, and care, traits he claimed had drawn him to her from the beginning. He described her as a hardworking woman who was deeply committed to both their family and her professional life, painting a picture of a woman who was both nurturing and resilient. Joseph spoke fondly about how their relationship had developed over time, highlighting what he saw as her admirable qualities. He mentioned that Mengqi was very detail-oriented and dedicated, attributes that he valued. Her strong work ethic and commitment to their daughter, Anna, were central to how he characterized her as both a mother and a partner. He repeatedly emphasized that Mengqi's love for their daughter was unwavering and that she was an exceptional mother, always putting Anna's well-being first. However, Joseph also admitted that their relationship had grown distant over the past few months. While he didn't provide specific details to the media, he acknowledged that they had experienced challenges and that there had been some emotional space between them. Joseph described how their communication had deteriorated, and they were no longer as close as they had been earlier in their marriage. Despite this, he expressed hope that Mengqi would return safely and that they could work through whatever issues had come between them. Joseph's statements to the media appeared to be an attempt to show concern and love for his wife while subtly acknowledging the tension in their marriage. His emotional appeal was framed around the idea that, despite their growing distance, he still deeply cared for Mengqi and wanted her to come home. His public plea, however, contrasted with growing suspicions that would later emerge as the investigation unfolded. As the search for Mengqi Ji intensified, the police broadened their investigation into her disappearance. They began meticulously examining every aspect of her and Joseph Elijah's life, looking for any clues that might explain what had happened. The focus turned to Mengqi's phone records, bank accounts, and surveillance footage from around their home and other places she frequented. One of the first steps the investigators took was to comb through Mengqi's phone data. Though her phone had been left behind at the house, it was locked and initially inaccessible. After obtaining permission and technical assistance, authorities managed to access the phone's contents, which revealed several troubling details. Most notably, they recovered deleted messages between Mengqi and close confidants that painted a starkly different picture from the one Joseph had shared. These deleted messages showed that Mengqi had been contemplating divorce for some time. According to the conversations she had with friends and family, Mengqi had grown increasingly unhappy in her marriage due to Joseph's abusive behavior. The messages detailed how Joseph had been emotionally manipulative and, at times, physically aggressive. Mengqi expressed feelings of fear and isolation, unsure of how to proceed with her life while taking care of their daughter, Anna. As the investigation deepened, it became clear that Mengqi had been quietly making plans to leave Joseph. She had been researching divorce options and considering her next steps, all while hiding her intentions from him. The police also discovered financial records showing that Mengqi had been setting aside money, possibly in preparation for leaving the marriage. Surveillance footage from nearby cameras provided additional insight, showing Joseph's movements around the time of her disappearance. The recovery of these deleted messages and financial activity dramatically shifted the tone of the investigation. What had initially seemed like a missing person case with unclear motives now pointed to a domestic situation that had been unraveling behind closed doors. The revelation that Mengqi had been planning a divorce because of Joseph's abusive behavior introduced the possibility that her disappearance was not voluntary and raised new suspicions about what might have really happened between the couple in the days leading up to her vanishing. During the extended investigation into Mengqi Ji's disappearance, a shocking discovery shifted the case even further. While focusing on Joseph Elledge's behavior and the dynamics within the household, the police began examining the couple's young daughter, Anna, for any signs of distress or neglect. In doing so, they discovered multiple bruises on the toddler's body, raising immediate red flags about potential child abuse. When questioned about the injuries, Joseph initially appeared reluctant, but eventually admitted to causing the bruises. He claimed that the marks were the result of his frustrations and anger while caring for their daughter during Mengqi's absence. Joseph downplayed the severity of the abuse, framing it as a loss of control in moments of stress, but his confession was enough to prompt swift legal action. With this admission, the police arrested Joseph on charges of child abuse, recognizing that his actions endangered the well-being of the couple's daughter. The charges marked a significant turn in the investigation, not only because of the harm inflicted on Anna, but also because they provided further insight into Joseph's volatile temperament, raising more serious concerns about his involvement in Mengqi's disappearance. In response to the charges, the court set Joseph's bail at a staggering $500,000. This high bail amount reflected the gravity of the situation and the potential danger he posed to both his child and the community. Meanwhile, the investigation into Mengqi's disappearance continued to unfold, and the police executed a search warrant at the alleged home. The search yielded critical pieces of evidence, including personal documents, a pair of muddy boots, and various items that would later connect Joseph to a more sinister aspect of the case. As Joseph remained in custody, law enforcement began piecing together a broader narrative of control, manipulation, and violence within the Elledge household, fueling their suspicions that Mengqi's disappearance was more than just a missing person case. Nearly a year after Mengqi Ji's disappearance, a significant breakthrough came when a hiker stumbled upon a grim discovery near a local river. While walking through the woods along the banks, the hiker found human remains partially buried in a shallow grave. Authorities were quickly called to the scene, and forensic investigators confirmed that the remains belonged to Mengqi Ji, bringing an end to the long search for her body. The discovery of Mengqi's body marked a critical turning point in the investigation. While suspicions had long centered around Joseph Elledge, the physical evidence connecting him to her death had remained elusive until now. Forensic experts collected soil samples from the scene, carefully analyzing the composition of the dirt near the burial site. These samples were then compared to the muddy boots that had been seized from Joseph's home during the earlier search warrant. The results were damning. The soil on Joseph's boots matched the dirt from the crime scene, providing direct evidence that Joseph had been at the location where Mengqi's body was found. This forensic link between Joseph and the burial site all but confirmed the police's suspicions that he had been involved in Mengqi's death and subsequent burial. The discovery also aligned with earlier phone data that placed Joseph near the river around the time of her disappearance. With the body recovered and forensic evidence tying him to the scene, the authorities moved forward with officially charging Joseph Elledge with first-degree murder. This charge signaled that investigators believed Joseph had intentionally caused Mengqi's death and then attempted to cover it up by burying her body far from their home. The year-long investigation had come to a grim conclusion, and the discovery of Mengqi's body not only brought closure to the search, but also paved the way for Joseph's trial, where the full details of the case would eventually be revealed. During Joseph Elledge's murder trial, he took the stand to provide his version of events surrounding Mengqi Ji's death. In a dramatic testimony, Joseph claimed that Mengqi's death had been accidental, the result of a physical altercation between the two that had escalated unexpectedly. According to Joseph, they had been arguing, and in the heat of the moment, a shove caused Mengqi to fall and hit her head. He insisted that her death was not intentional, portraying it as a tragic accident. However, Joseph's defense did little to mitigate the gravity of his subsequent actions. After Mengqi's death, rather than seeking medical help or reporting the incident, Joseph admitted to making a series of calculated decisions to conceal what had happened. He testified that he placed Mengqi's body in the trunk of their car and drove to a remote location near the river, where he buried her. He further confessed that their young daughter had been in the car during the journey to dispose of Mengqi's body. These admissions of covering up Mengqi's death and hiding her body raised serious doubts about Joseph's claim that it was an accident. Prosecutors argued that his deliberate actions after her death, including the year-long concealment of the body, indicated an intent to hide his crime rather than face the consequences. They emphasized Joseph's history of abusive behavior, pointing to evidence that Mengqi had been planning to leave him due to his emotional and physical abuse. Despite Joseph's defense that the death had not been premeditated, the jury found the overall circumstances too compelling to support his version of events. After weighing the evidence, including the forensic findings that linked him to the burial site, the jury concluded that Joseph was responsible for Mengqi's death, but did not believe it rose to the level of first-degree murder. Instead, they convicted him of second-degree murder, determining that while Mengqi's death may not have been pre-planned, it was a result of reckless and violent actions. After a lengthy trial, Joseph Elledge was found guilty of second-degree murder in the death of his wife, Mengqi Ji. The jury, after deliberating on the evidence, concluded that while Joseph may not have premeditated the killing, his actions were reckless and ultimately led to Mengqi's death. The prosecution's case, supported by forensic evidence and testimony about Joseph's abusive behavior, painted a picture of a marriage marred by control and violence. The judge sentenced Joseph to 28 years in prison, a significant sentence for second-degree murder, reflecting the severity of his actions, particularly his attempts to cover up Mengqi's death by burying her body and misleading investigators for nearly a year. The jury's decision brought an end to the case, which had captured public attention due to its tragic and disturbing nature. The sentencing provided some closure for Mengqi's family, who had been left to wonder what had happened to her for months. While the defense had argued that Mengqi's death was an accident, the jury's verdict signified that Joseph's actions, both before and after her death, were far from those of a remorseful husband. With the final sentence handed down, Joseph Elledge will spend the next 28 years behind bars, marking the conclusion of a case that revealed the devastating consequences of domestic violence and manipulation. The community and Mengqi's loved ones could now begin the difficult process of healing, knowing that justice had been served. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want to stay updated with more content, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so please leave a comment below, whether it's your opinion on the case, any questions you have, or suggestions for future topics. Your feedback helps us create better content. See you in the next video. In the spring of 2019, 15-year-old Riley Crossman vanished from Morgan County, West Virginia. At first, her family and friends held on to hope, believing she would return soon. However, their worst fears were realized just 8 days later when Riley's body was found inside a trash bag along a highway. The case took an even darker turn when the prime suspect emerged, her stepfather, Andy McCauley, who had been living with Riley's mother. Riley Crossman was born on December 22, 2003, in the quaint town of Martinsburg, West Virginia, a small community known for its family-friendly atmosphere. With a population of around 20,000, Martinsburg is a peaceful place to grow up, surrounded by scenic landscapes and offering a quiet, small-town life. Riley was raised in a loving family where she was particularly close to her younger sister, Jade, and her older brothers, Ryder and Parker. Described by family and friends as caring and dependable, Riley was always there for her siblings, often acting as a protective older sister. Despite having a happy childhood, Riley and her siblings faced a significant challenge when their parents divorced. The separation was difficult for the family, and it left a lasting impact on Riley. While they continued to visit their father in Martinsburg, The children lived primarily with their mother, Chantel, in the nearby town of Berkeley Springs, about 25 miles or 40 kilometers away. As the family adjusted to their new life, Chantel began a relationship with Andy McCauley, who eventually moved in with them. This new family dynamic brought changes to Riley's life, but she continued to maintain her close relationships with her siblings and friends. Known for being creative, reliable, and a bit stubborn, Riley had a bright future ahead of her, surrounded by people who cared for her deeply, until her life was tragically cut short. Riley Crossman was a bright and promising teenager, excelling both academically and socially. Known for her strong work ethic, she was a standout student at Berkeley Springs High School. Teachers and classmates often praised her for being intelligent, driven, and responsible, qualities that set her apart. Riley had a natural curiosity about the world, always asking questions and diving deep into her studies. She was also creative with a passion for art and writing, which she often expressed through her schoolwork and personal projects. Her academic performance was consistently impressive, and she was well on her way to a bright future. But Riley wasn't just a model student. She also had a vibrant social life. She was popular among her peers, not because she sought attention, but because of her genuine kindness and warmth. Riley had a close-knit group of friends who valued her loyalty, humor, and the caring nature she always displayed. Her friendships were a core part of her life, and she often spent weekends hanging out with her friends, attending school events, and making memories that would define her teenage years. Despite her achievements in school, she was still humble and grounded, always putting others first and offering support whenever it was needed. In addition to her academic and social successes, Riley's personal life was filled with happiness, particularly in her relationship with her boyfriend, Hayden Lacey. Riley and Hayden met at Berkeley Springs High School, and their connection was almost immediate. They clicked right away, quickly becoming inseparable. Friends often commented on how perfect they seemed together, the kind of young love that radiated joy and excitement. Hayden became an important part of Riley's life, and their relationship blossomed into something serious and deeply meaningful for both of them. Their bond extended beyond school dances and dates. Riley and Hayden spent hours talking on the phone, texting, and video chatting, making the most of their time together even when they were apart. They met each other's families, a sign of how close they had grown. Their relationship was a source of happiness for Riley, providing her with emotional support during stressful times and giving her a sense of belonging and love. Friends and family noticed how much Hayden cared for her, and it was clear that they shared a deep connection that was rare for teenagers their age. As Riley approached the end of her sophomore year, her life seemed to be filled with excitement and possibility. She had supportive friends, a loving family, and a boyfriend who made her feel cherished. Everything pointed to a future filled with the potential, whether it was her academic ambitions or the new adventures she'd experienced with Hayden. However, underneath this seemingly perfect life, there were shadows that no one could have foreseen. The strong-willed, creative, and innocent girl that everyone knew was on the brink of a tragedy that would soon shock her entire community. Despite her outward happiness, Riley's life would soon take a dark and irreversible turn, one that would tear apart the very fabric of her family and leave her loved ones searching for answers. May 7, 2019 started like any other day for 15-year-old Riley Crossman. The weather was warm, signaling the approach of summer, and Riley had a typical day at Berkeley Springs High School. There were no signs that anything was wrong as she went through her classes and interacted with friends. When the school day ended, she returned home in the afternoon, arriving around 3 p.m. Her mother, Chantel, was resting on the couch, exhausted from working 2 jobs. Riley, knowing her mom needed sleep, quietly went about her evening without disturbing her. As the evening wore on, Riley spent time with her younger brothers and grandmother, Debbie, who had been helping around the house. After her grandmother left around 7:30 p.m., Riley retreated to her bedroom. It seemed like an ordinary evening for a teenager, until something unsettling happened. Riley had been on FaceTime with her boyfriend, Hayden Lacey, when an argument broke out between them. Hayden was scheduled to go on a school trip to Washington, D.C. the next day, and Riley became anxious about him spending time with other girls on the trip. Their disagreement ended when Hayden fell asleep around 10 p.m., but the night took a chilling turn when Riley sent Hayden 2 disturbing text messages. At 11:01 p.m., Riley texted Hayden, "Andy's in my room. Shh, don't say anything so he can hear everything." Just 12 minutes later, she sent a second, even more alarming message. "I'm scared, babe." These would be the last messages Riley would ever send. What happened between 11:01 p.m. and the following morning remains a mystery, but it marked the beginning of Riley's tragic disappearance. On the morning of May 8, 2019, Riley's mother, Chantel, noticed that Riley was not in her bedroom when she checked around 7:15 a.m. However, she wasn't immediately alarmed. Chantel assumed that Riley had left for school early, perhaps to catch her boyfriend, Hayden, before his school trip to Washington, D.C. It wasn't unusual for Riley to leave the house early when she had plans or wanted to meet up with Hayden, so her absence didn't raise concerns at first. Throughout the day, everyone in the family went about their usual routines, fully expecting that Riley would return home around her normal time in the afternoon. But as the clock ticked past her usual arrival time of 3:30 p.m., concern began to grow. Riley was a responsible teenager, and she always let her family know if her plans changed or if she would be home late. Riley's grandmother, Debbie, was the first to sense something was wrong when Riley didn't show up after school. Chantel began calling Riley's phone, but all her calls went straight to voicemail. Text messages went unanswered. This was completely out of character for Riley, who was never far from her phone and always responded quickly to messages. By this point, alarm bells were ringing in Chantel's mind. She hadn't seen Riley since the previous evening when her bedroom door was closed, and she assumed Riley was asleep. The growing realization that Riley hadn't been seen, coupled with her failure to respond to calls and texts, sent her family into a state of panic. Chantel's motherly instinct told her that something was terribly wrong, and the family's worst fears were starting to surface. Riley, a responsible and thoughtful girl, wouldn't simply disappear without a word. As panic set in, Chantel's worry grew into dread. She had not seen Riley since the previous night, and with no response from her daughter's phone, she knew something was wrong. Trusting her instinct as a mother, Chantel quickly decided to take action. After a frantic search of their home and the neighborhood turned up no sign of Riley, Chantel made the heart-wrenching decision to call 911 and report her daughter missing. When Chantel informed Andy, Riley's stepfather, of her disappearance, his reaction struck her as strange. While he initially claimed to be concerned, his behavior didn't match the urgency of the situation. He assured Chantel that he would go out to search for Riley, but his actions were inconsistent. Andy left the house on his bicycle to search, but when Chantel returned from looking for Riley herself, she was shocked to find him back home, asleep on the couch rather than continuing the search. His odd behavior only deepened Chantel's growing unease. She expected Andy to be out frantically searching for his stepdaughter, yet he seemed indifferent and dismissive. This, combined with the mounting tension of not knowing where Riley was, raised suspicions about his involvement. Something wasn't right, and soon the authorities would focus their attention on Andy McCauley as a person of interest in Riley's disappearance. As soon as Riley was reported missing, the police quickly launched an investigation. Officers began by interviewing her family members and close friends, hoping to gather any information that might explain her sudden disappearance. Riley's mother, Chantel, and her boyfriend, Hayden, were among the first to be questioned. Both expressed their deep concern and confusion over Riley's vanishing. But as the investigation progressed, troubling details began to surface. During interviews with Riley's friends, one unsettling revelation emerged. Riley had confided in some of them about her discomfort around Andy McCauley, her stepfather. She had mentioned feeling uneasy and even frightened by his presence in the house, especially when her mother wasn't around. This fear was confirmed by the chilling final text she had sent to Hayden the night before she went missing, expressing her fear of Andy being in her room. These revelations turned the investigation in a new direction. Police began to suspect that Riley's disappearance was not a simple case of a runaway or an accident. The possibility that she had been harmed by someone close to her, someone she should have been able to trust, was becoming a real concern. With Andy's odd behavior and Riley's apparent fear of him, he quickly became the focus of the investigation. The next step for authorities would be to delve deeper into his background and movements, hoping to uncover the truth about what happened to Riley. As the investigation deepened, Andy McCauley's behavior increasingly raised red flags. When questioned by the police, Andy gave inconsistent statements about his whereabouts on the night of Riley's disappearance. At first, he claimed he had last seen Riley in the house and went to bed early, insisting that nothing unusual had happened. However, as the questioning continued, his story began to shift. He couldn't clearly account for all his actions that night, offering vague and contradictory explanations. His claim that he had been asleep throughout the night didn't match other evidence, including phone records that showed activity from his phone during the early morning hours. Further digging into Andy's past revealed a troubled history. Andy had a criminal record that included charges for drug use, burglary, and assault, painting a picture of someone with a long-standing pattern of instability and violence. His history with substance abuse also surfaced, as police learned that he had been struggling with addiction for years, often acting erratically when under the influence of drugs. This dark past cast an even larger shadow of suspicion over him, especially considering Riley's fear of him, which had become a focal point of the investigation. With his inconsistent statements, suspicious behavior, and a past riddled with criminal activity, Andy became the prime suspect in Riley's disappearance. Investigators now had to piece together the timeline of his actions on the night she went missing and explore whether his troubled past had tragically collided with Riley's future. The pressure was mounting, and the authorities were closing in on Andy as they sought to uncover the truth. One of the most crucial pieces of evidence in the investigation were the final text messages Riley sent to her boyfriend, Hayden. These messages painted a deeply disturbing picture of Riley's fear in the moments leading up to her disappearance. At 11:01 p.m. on the night she vanished, Riley texted Hayden, telling him that Andy's in my room and asking him not to say anything because Andy could hear everything. Just 12 minutes later, she sent another message. I'm scared, babe. These haunting texts strongly suggested that Riley felt threatened by Andy, further solidifying him as the primary suspect in the case. To gather more information, investigators asked Andy to take a polygraph test. Though Andy agreed to do so voluntarily, the results were inconclusive. The reason became apparent when it was revealed that Andy was under the influence of drugs at the time of the test. His history of drug abuse had resurfaced during the investigation, and his impaired state during the polygraph test only raised more suspicion. The fact that Andy had taken the test while high also prevented the police from getting clear answers, adding another layer of complexity to the case. Despite the inconclusive polygraph results, the alarming final messages from Riley, combined with Andy's erratic behavior and troubled past, led investigators to focus even more intensely on him. With each new development, it became increasingly clear that Andy was hiding something, and the police were determined to uncover the truth behind Riley's tragic disappearance. As the investigation progressed, investigators uncovered more troubling evidence that further implicated Andy McCauley in Riley's disappearance. One of the most significant breakthroughs came from CCTV footage that showed Andy leaving his job site for an extended period on the day after Riley went missing. Despite his initial claim that he had been at work the entire day, the footage revealed that he left the site in his green truck and was gone for several hours. This directly contradicted Andy's alibi and raised even more questions about his whereabouts during that critical time. In addition to the discrepancies in his story, witnesses from the job site reported suspicious behavior on Andy's part. He had asked his boss for several heavy-duty trash bags, claiming that he needed them to clean up another job. When Andy returned to the site hours later, his appearance was disheveled. His shoes were untied and his clothes looked messy, as if he had hurriedly dressed. His boss noted that Andy's behavior was odd and out of character, adding to the mounting suspicion surrounding him. These inconsistencies in Andy's alibi, coupled with the CCTV footage and witness accounts, painted a damning picture. Investigators now believe that Andy had used the time away from the job site to dispose of evidence related to Riley's disappearance. As the case unfolded, it became increasingly clear that Andy had lied about his actions, and his suspicious behavior only deepened the mystery of what had happened to Riley. The investigation was now focused on uncovering the full extent of Andy's involvement and finding concrete evidence to bring him to justice. The investigation took a tragic and heartbreaking turn when 8 days after Riley's disappearance, her body was discovered in a heavily decomposed state. Authorities found her remains wrapped in a trash bag and discarded along Tuscarora Pike, a remote area near a highway. The advanced decomposition made it difficult for the medical examiner to immediately determine the exact cause of death, but it was quickly ruled a homicide. The condition of her body, combined with the circumstances of her disappearance, left little doubt that foul play was involved. Forensic evidence soon began to link Riley's stepfather, Andy McCauley, to the crime. Investigators discovered that the trash bags used to conceal Riley's body matched the type of bags Andy had requested from his boss on the day after she went missing. Furthermore, fibers and other forensic materials found on Riley's clothing and in the area where her body was discovered matched items connected to Andy's work truck and tools. One particularly damning piece of evidence was the presence of drywall mud and screws found near Riley's body, which were consistent with materials Andy had access to at his job. Investigators also found evidence linking Andy's movements, as captured by CCTV, to locations near the crime scene. These findings directly connected Andy to the site where Riley's body was left, further confirming his involvement in her tragic death. With the discovery of Riley's body and the mounting forensic evidence, the case against Andy McCauley became more concrete. Investigators were closing in, and it was only a matter of time before Andy would be charged for the horrific crime that had shattered Riley's family and community. On May 16, 2019, just days after Riley's body was discovered, Andy McCauley was officially arrested and charged with her murder. Investigators had gathered enough evidence, including forensic links and inconsistencies in Andy's alibi, to charge him with first-degree murder, as well as additional charges related to child abuse and concealing a body. His arrest brought a sense of relief to Riley's devastated family, but it also marked the beginning of a long legal battle to bring justice to Riley's memory. The trial, delayed by various legal proceedings, finally began in September 2021. During the trial, the prosecution laid out a chilling case, detailing how Andy McCauley, someone who should have protected Riley, had instead taken her life. The prosecution presented forensic evidence, CCTV footage, and witness testimonies that highlighted Andy's suspicious behavior and actions surrounding the time of Riley's disappearance. They painted a picture of a man with a troubled past, whose actions on the night of May 7, 2020 led to the tragic and senseless murder of a young girl. The defense, on the other hand, attempted to cast doubt on the evidence, pointing to the lack of direct eyewitnesses and trying to shift blame. However, the overwhelming amount of circumstantial and forensic evidence made it clear that Andy was responsible. The final blow to the defense's case came when multiple forensic experts testified, linking Andy to the crime scene through the use of trash bags, fibers, and materials found both on Riley's body and in Andy's truck. The trial was emotionally charged, with Riley's family members, particularly her father, Lance Crossman, testifying about the profound loss they had suffered. The community, too, watched the trial closely, hoping for a verdict that would bring some measure of closure to the tragedy that had rocked their small town. The trial would soon come to its climactic end, as both sides prepared for the jury's verdict. During the trial, key testimonies from witnesses and forensic experts played a crucial role in building the case against Andy McCauley. One of the most compelling testimonies came from Andy's boss, who recalled how Andy had behaved on the day following Riley's disappearance. His boss testified that Andy had asked for several heavy-duty trash bags, claiming he needed them to clean up a job site. However, after leaving the site for several hours, Andy returned looking disheveled. His shoes were untied and his clothes were messy, as if he had dressed in a hurry. This behavior, combined with the discovery of Riley's body wrapped in similar trash bags, painted a damning picture of Andy's involvement. Forensic experts also provided critical evidence that further incriminated Andy. They testified that fibers, drywall mud, and screws found near Riley's body were consistent with materials in Andy's work truck and tool belt. This evidence directly linked Andy to the location where Riley's body had been dumped. Additionally, forensic analysis of Riley's remains suggested that the cause of death was likely suffocation or strangulation, though the state of decomposition made it difficult to determine an exact cause. Despite the challenges presented by the advanced state of decomposition, experts noted several indicators that Riley had been strangled. Her body was found with her t-shirt bunched around her neck, and her shorts and underwear had been manipulated in a way that suggested a struggle. The physical evidence, combined with Andy's inconsistent statements and his suspicious behavior on the day after Riley disappeared, solidified the prosecution's case. The testimonies of the forensic experts, along with the eyewitness account from Andy's boss, created a clear narrative. Andy had killed Riley, wrapped her body in trash bags, and disposed of her along a rural highway. The evidence overwhelmingly pointed toward suffocation or strangulation as the cause of death, and the prosecution was able to show that Andy had the means, opportunity, and motive to commit the crime. As the trial progressed, the evidence mounted against Andy, and it became increasingly clear to the jury that he was responsible for Riley's tragic death. The trial was now approaching its final phase, with both the defense and prosecution preparing for closing arguments before the jury would render its verdict. After weeks of emotional testimonies, forensic evidence, and witness statements, the jury in Andy McCauley's trial reached its conclusion. On the day of the verdict, tension filled the courtroom as Riley's family, friends, and community members anxiously awaited the decision that would determine whether justice would be served for the senseless murder of the 15-year-old girl. The case had gripped the small town, and now all eyes were on the jury. When the jury returned, they found Andy McCauley guilty of first-degree murder. This conviction confirmed that the jury believed Andy had not only murdered Riley Crossman, but had done so with premeditation. The weight of this verdict was heavy, as it meant that Andy had deliberately taken the life of the girl he should have protected as a father figure. The courtroom was filled with emotion, especially from Riley's family, who had endured unimaginable pain since her disappearance. However, the trial wasn't over yet. The jury now had to decide whether to attach mercy to Andy's sentence. Under West Virginia law, if mercy is attached to a first-degree murder conviction, the defendant would be eligible for parole after serving 15 years. Without mercy, Andy would be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a sentence that would ensure he spent the rest of his life behind bars. The prosecution argued that Andy did not deserve any mercy, emphasizing the brutality of the crime, his repeated lies, and his attempts to cover up what he had done to Riley. Riley's father, Lance Crossman, delivered a powerful and emotional statement to the jury before they made their decision. He spoke about the unbearable loss of his daughter, describing her as a bright, loving, and innocent girl whose life had been cut tragically short. With tears in his eyes, Lance asked the jury, where was the mercy when he took her life? Where was the mercy when he put her in a trash bag and threw her away like garbage? His words resonated deeply with everyone in the courtroom, highlighting the profound impact Riley's death had on her family and community. After hearing the final arguments and emotional pleas from both sides, the jury deliberated on the question of mercy. It didn't take long for them to reach a unanimous decision. No mercy would be attached to Andy McCauley's sentence. This meant that Andy would be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He would never walk free again, and Riley's family would never have to face the possibility of seeing him released. When the sentence was read, there was a palpable sense of relief in the courtroom. Justice had been served for Riley, and her family could finally find some measure of closure, knowing that Andy McCauley would spend the rest of his life behind bars, paying for the horrific crime he had committed. Though the pain of losing Riley would never fully go away, the conviction and life sentence without parole ensured that her killer would be held accountable for his actions. As the courtroom emptied, the community reflected on the tragedy that had shaken their small town. Riley's life had been stolen in the most cruel and senseless way, but her family found solace in knowing that justice had been achieved. Andy McCauley's conviction marked the end of a long and painful journey for Riley's loved ones, and his life sentence without parole meant that he would never have another chance to harm anyone again. Riley Crossman's tragic story serves as a haunting reminder that danger can sometimes come from those closest to us. Her life was taken in a place where she should have felt safest, and her loss underscores the importance of staying vigilant and aware of potential threats, even when they seem unlikely. We encourage everyone watching to be mindful of warning signs in their own lives and the lives of those they care about. Trust your instincts, ask questions, and don't hesitate to act if something feels off. It's our duty to protect each other and prevent tragedies like this from happening again. If you found this case compelling and want to stay informed about similar stories, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you'll be the first to know when we release new content about shocking cases, unsolved mysteries, and important safety tips. Hit the notification bell to make sure you don't miss any updates. Stay safe, stay alert, and always keep your loved ones close. In a remote town in Alaska, a chilling case unfolds that would haunt both the police department and the community for years to come. The brutal murder of 19-year-old Sonia Ivanov sends shockwaves through the small population, igniting fear and suspicion among the residents. As investigators delve into the circumstances surrounding her death, they are confronted with a scene so horrifying that it leaves a lasting impression on everyone involved. The atmosphere of fear is palpable. Police officers who once patrolled the quiet streets now find themselves feeling threatened, as if the very shadows could harbor the murderer among them. Rumors swirl and whispers fill the air, with the entire town on edge, grappling with the terrifying realization that a predator walks free among them. In a place where everyone knows each other, the sense of safety has been shattered, and the quest for justice becomes a race against time to restore peace to a community gripped by fear. Nestled along Alaska's isolated western coast, Nome is a remote settlement where life is shaped by the vast wilderness and extreme conditions of the Arctic. Its roughly 3,500 residents form a close-knit community where everyone knows each other by name. This town, once a bustling hub during the Gold Rush era, now stands as a quiet reminder of Alaska's rugged past. Nome's remoteness has created a culture of self-reliance and unity among its residents, who share both the challenges and joys of life in one of America's most isolated regions. Here, people depend on one another in ways unique to small, isolated communities, forming bonds that go back generations. Nome is characterized by low crime rates, with little more than the occasional dispute or petty theft disrupting the town's peace. For most, life in Nome is simple and predictable, and safety is almost taken for granted. The police force is small, familiar with residents and their daily routines, and the most serious issues are typically handled with a handshake and a conversation. Rarely does an event occur that makes the community feel anything less than safe. But in the summer of 2003, that changed. The brutal murder of 19-year-old Sonia Ivanov marked a defining, dark moment for the town. Her tragic death sent shockwaves through the community, introducing a level of fear and suspicion that Nome had never experienced. Residents who once left doors unlocked began taking precautions, their sense of security shattered. Rumors and unease spread quickly, and the familiar faces around town suddenly seemed less trustworthy. The incident forced Nome's residents to confront a chilling reality. Even in the most remote and seemingly secure places, danger could find its way in. Sonia's death would forever alter the community's sense of safety, leaving a lasting scar on the heart of Nome. On August 12, 2003, the tight-knit community of Nome felt the first unsettling stirrings of fear when Sonia Ivanov, a lively and beloved 19-year-old, was reported missing by her roommate, Timur. The two shared a small apartment in town, and for Tim, Sonia was more than just a friend. She was like family. Sonia was known for her dependable nature and habit of checking in with her loved ones. When she failed to return home after a night out with friends, Tim initially assumed she might have stayed over at someone else's place, as young people in Nome often did. But as dawn broke and there was still no sign of Sonia, Tim began to worry. Throughout the morning, Tim tried calling Sonia, only to be met with silence. With each unanswered call, her concern deepened, and she began reaching out to mutual friends, asking if anyone had seen Sonia or heard from her since the previous evening. Unfortunately, no one had any information. Sonia's phone appeared to be off, and no one could confirm her whereabouts after the night out. Hours stretched on with no sign of Sonia, and Tim's worry turned into a gnawing fear that something terrible had happened. When she reported Sonia missing to the police later that day, Tim was already dreading the worst. Sonia wasn't the type to disappear without a word. She was responsible, and even after nights out, she always made her way home. The police, recognizing the seriousness of her sudden disappearance, quickly escalated their response. Officers began reaching out to those who had last seen her, retracing her steps and combing through any details that might provide a clue. Sonia's last known movements suggested she had been with friends, but the specifics of her departure remained a mystery. As investigators realized how out of character Sonia's silence was, the weight of the case intensified. Friends and family members gathered, organizing search efforts and distributing flyers, hoping against hope that someone had seen her or could recall something that would lead them to her. But with every hour that passed, the grim reality grew more apparent. This was no ordinary case of a young woman running late or avoiding calls. Sonia's sudden disappearance, in the safety of her own community, marked the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt Nome and force its residents to confront a terrifying truth: that danger could strike even in the most familiar and seemingly secure places. As the search for Sonia Ivanov intensified, police combed the surrounding areas, hoping for any sign of the missing young woman. Despite the urgency, no one anticipated that within a few hours of initiating the search, the case would take a heart-wrenching turn. Just 3 hours after the investigation began, the grim discovery was made. Sonia's body had been found, lifeless and alone, ending the hopes of her safe return. Officer Byron Redburn, one of the first responders on the scene, came upon her body in an unusually tidy clearing. The area around her appeared undisturbed, as if Sonia had been placed there with deliberate care. There were no immediate signs of struggle, no scattered belongings, no torn clothing, no visible injuries on her body that could explain her tragic fate. The only detail that stood out was a single sock on one of her feet, an eerie, seemingly trivial detail that left investigators puzzled. The quiet of the scene was chilling, amplifying the sense of unnatural stillness that hung over the area. As Officer Redburn took in the scene, he realized that this wasn't merely a tragic accident or a death from natural causes. There was a disturbing, almost ritualistic quality to the way Sonia had been left, raising questions about what had happened in her final hours. This careful placement of her body pointed to something far darker, a calculated and possibly staged crime that hinted at a disturbing mind behind the act. The discovery of Sonia's body left both the investigators and the town reeling. For Nome's residents, the tragic find shattered their sense of security, leaving everyone wondering who among them could have committed such an act. The case was no longer just a missing person investigation. It had transformed into a murder case, one that would haunt Nome long after that day. With the heartbreaking discovery of Sonia Ivanov's body, Nome's law enforcement began a full-scale investigation, aware that each minute counted. The police immediately secured the area, meticulously cordoning off the scene to prevent any contamination. Forensic investigator Carrie Cathcart arrived swiftly, stepping into a clearing that was eerily still, as if nature itself sensed the gravity of what had happened. Carrie's task was daunting: to capture every piece of evidence, no matter how minute, and to construct a timeline from the fractured remnants left behind. Carrie began by photographing the scene, capturing each angle and recording the environment. Her keen eye noted that Sonia's body, lying on the ground, was surrounded by undisturbed foliage, suggesting she had been placed with care. But as Carrie examined Sonia more closely, a darker story began to reveal itself. Her face bore the unmistakable signs of violence, with deep bruising along her cheekbones and around her jawline. The discoloration of the bruises indicated that these injuries had been inflicted shortly before her death, suggesting a final, violent struggle with her assailant. Beyond the bruises, Carrie's attention was drawn to something even more chilling: faint traces of blood spattered close to Sonia's body. These small stains scattered on the ground hinted at her final moments, where she may have fought for her life. The presence of blood outside of her body suggested a struggle, possibly one that had taken place before she was moved to this location. Carrie carefully swabbed and documented each bloodstain, knowing it could reveal critical details in the lab. Nearby, another piece of evidence drew her eye: a set of tire tracks pressed into the soft, damp earth. The tracks were fresh, leading both to and from the location, suggesting a vehicle had been used to transport Sonia to this secluded spot. Carrie examined the pattern of the tread, noting the width and depth of the tracks. From these details, she could infer the type of vehicle that may have been used, perhaps a truck or SUV, with enough space to carry a person and remain inconspicuous on the town's rougher roads. The tracks were a significant lead, indicating premeditation and suggesting that Sonia's killer had deliberately chosen this remote location to conceal her body. As she continued to document the scene, Carrie couldn't shake the feeling that this crime was as calculated as it was brutal. The bruises, the blood, and the tire tracks painted a grim picture of someone who had taken careful steps to cover their tracks. Yet despite these efforts, the scene was beginning to tell a story, a tale of violence, coldly concealed in a secluded clearing. Carrie knew that each piece of evidence she collected, no matter how small, would be critical in understanding the events leading to Sonia's tragic end. As the investigation pushed forward, the police and forensic team knew that Noam's sense of peace was shattered. The evidence gathered in those early hours would serve as the foundation of a case that would forever change the community. The story unfolding hinted at a predator who had exploited the town's trust, and Carrie was determined to see that the clues left behind would speak for Sonia and bring her justice. The investigation's focus quickly turned to finding suspects, starting with those closest to Sonia. The first name to emerge was Andrew "Donnie" Donnelly, a local man well known around Nome. Donnie had long harbored an intense infatuation with Sonia, a fascination that, while initially dismissed as harmless, had recently escalated into troubling behavior. Witnesses described his persistent attempts to gain her attention and noted his visible distress whenever she didn't reciprocate his feelings. Given his fixation, Donnie's name naturally surfaced as a person of interest, and he was promptly brought in for questioning. During his interview, Donnie appeared cooperative, readily providing details about his whereabouts on the night of Sonia's disappearance. He claimed he had spent the evening with friends and had a solid alibi, corroborated by multiple individuals who confirmed seeing him at a local bar. Despite his alibi, investigators were reluctant to rule him out entirely. Donnie's obsession with Sonia painted a motive that was difficult to ignore. The police decided to proceed with a search of his belongings, including his truck, hoping to uncover any evidence that might either confirm or dispel their suspicions. Upon inspecting Donnie's truck, forensic investigators discovered traces of blood on the back seat and along the truck bed. The discovery was a potential breakthrough, reigniting suspicions about his involvement. If the blood belonged to Sonia, it could provide the link needed to tie Donnie to her death. However, further testing yielded an unexpected result. The blood was identified as animal blood, most likely from a hunting trip. While it momentarily raised suspicions, this detail ultimately failed to connect him to the crime scene. The investigation into Donnie, though initially promising, left the detectives with more questions than answers. While his obsession with Sonia remained unsettling, his alibi, combined with the lack of forensic evidence tying him to her death, forced the police to consider other leads. Still, Donnie's involvement couldn't be entirely dismissed, and the team remained on high alert for any inconsistencies in his story. As Nome's investigators continued to comb through leads and potential suspects, the mystery surrounding Sonia's death only deepened, with each clue adding to the chilling puzzle that had now captivated the entire town. As the investigation into Sonia Ivanov's tragic death continued, the autopsy report arrived with haunting revelations. The medical examiner confirmed that Sonia's life had been ended by a single shot from a .22 caliber bullet, a small but deadly round often associated with discreet, controlled violence. This was no chaotic act of rage. It was a calculated execution, a detail that left detectives unnerved. The lack of any defensive wounds suggested Sonia may have been caught off guard, making it unlikely that she had anticipated an attack. Additionally, there were no signs of sexual assault, ruling out one potential motive that investigators initially considered. Whoever killed Sonia had a different intent, one that remained disturbingly unclear. This case, initially tragic, now carried even darker implications. Investigators began re-evaluating everything they knew, searching for connections to anyone who might possess the expertise and familiarity to carry out such a precise, restrained killing. They realized they might be facing a predator who knew how to commit the crime without leaving obvious evidence, a scenario that sent chills through the team. But it was the lead that came from a local resident, Allison Warren, that would truly transform the investigation. Days after the murder, Allison, a friend of Sonia's, approached detectives with a disturbing memory from the night Sonia disappeared. As Allison recounted, she had been walking home and had caught a glimpse of Sonia standing on a quiet street corner. Allison thought nothing of it until she saw Sonia enter a police car. In any other situation, this detail would have seemed routine. Police officers sometimes gave rides to residents, especially young women, as a courtesy in this tight-knit community. But now, with Sonia's death, the implications were chilling. As detectives listened to Allison's account, the room went silent. The possibility that Sonia had willingly entered a police car, likely under the impression she was safe, brought forth a horrifying scenario. Someone within the force could be involved in her death. Such a betrayal would have been unimaginable. Police officers were the guardians of Nome, the figures residents turned to in times of danger. For one of them to be a suspect in Sonia's murder was beyond anything the community had ever faced. The investigation took a sharp turn. Now, instead of looking solely at external suspects, detectives had to scrutinize their own. An internal probe was launched, and investigators began meticulously reviewing the whereabouts of each officer on the night of Sonia's disappearance. They dug through records, traced movements, and cross-examined every possible detail, hoping to either confirm or disprove the horrifying lead. Meanwhile, word of Allison's testimony quickly spread through Nome, sending waves of shock and fear through the community. People who had once felt a sense of security in the presence of law enforcement now looked at officers with suspicion, wondering if someone they trusted could be a killer. Parents kept a closer watch on their children, and friends walked in pairs, wary of every shadow. The trust that had once been the foundation of this small town had been shattered, replaced by an unshakable fear that danger could lie anywhere, even behind a familiar badge. For the investigators, the case had become something larger than finding Sonia's killer. It was now a fight to uncover the truth hidden within the very institution meant to protect Nome. As they closed in on potential suspects, the team knew that each discovery would bring them closer to a resolution, but at a cost that the entire community would feel. With the chilling possibility that Sonia's killer might be a member of law enforcement, investigators turned their attention inward, reviewing each officer's whereabouts and actions on the night of her disappearance. Two names quickly came under scrutiny: Officers Paul Souza and Matthew Owens, both of whom had been on duty that night. While both men were seasoned members of the force, the suspicion surrounding them cast a shadow over their reputations and unsettled the entire department. Initially, both officers provided alibis, each claiming to have been engaged in routine patrols across Nome. However, as investigators dug deeper, inconsistencies began to emerge. Officer Matthew Owens's alibi raised red flags almost immediately. He claimed to have been stationed near a popular restaurant at a specific time, yet witnesses and records from that night conflicted with his story. Several people who frequented the area that evening could not recall seeing him, and surveillance footage showed no sign of his patrol car where he claimed to be. These discrepancies caused the investigative team to take a harder look at Matthew's potential involvement. In contrast, Officer Paul Souza's alibi held firm under scrutiny. According to computer logs, Paul had checked in at various points around town using his patrol car's onboard computer system, creating a verifiable timeline of his locations. His digital record matched both the expected patrol routes and witness accounts of his movements. Investigators found no deviation or delay that could place Paul near Sonia's last known location that night, allowing them to clear him of direct involvement. The mounting suspicion around Matthew Owens, however, was hard to ignore. Known around town as a quiet but sometimes temperamental officer, he had a reputation for being strict, even overly authoritative at times. The new inconsistencies in his alibi hinted at something potentially darker beneath his composed exterior. Investigators began to piece together a profile of Matthew's behaviors and past interactions with residents, noting any incidents where he may have demonstrated uncharacteristic aggression or had specific encounters with Sonia. As Matthew remained a person of interest, investigators combed through his personal records, looking for any past incidents, complaints, or interactions with Sonia that might reveal a motive. Simultaneously, forensic experts examined his patrol car, hoping to find any trace evidence that could place Sonia inside. This pursuit of truth had become painstaking, each step taken with the understanding that the consequences of their findings could forever change Nome. If Matthew Owens was indeed responsible, it would represent not only the loss of a young woman, but also a catastrophic betrayal of the community's trust. As the investigation into Sonia Ivanov's murder grew more complex, a startling development threw the case into further chaos. A patrol car was reported stolen from the police department's lot. The theft of an official vehicle was a significant breach of security, and detectives immediately suspected that it could be connected to Sonia's case. It was rare for a patrol car to go missing, especially in a small town like Nome, and the timing of the theft raised suspicion that someone was trying to send a message or conceal evidence. When the stolen car was found abandoned on a remote road just outside town, Investigators approached it with caution, recognizing that it could be a critical crime scene. As they examined the vehicle, they quickly noted disturbing evidence that suggested a connection to Sonia's case. Inside the patrol car, forensic experts found what appeared to be faint blood stains on the passenger seat. While tests were pending to confirm whether the blood belonged to Sonia, the presence of any blood at all in an official vehicle was deeply alarming. It hinted at the possibility that the stolen car had been used in the commission of a crime or to transport Sonia. But the most unsettling discovery was yet to come. Tucked into the vehicle's glove compartment, investigators found a small, crumpled note, hastily written but with a clear, menacing message. Silence the witness or be next. The note was unsigned, and the handwriting was almost deliberately scrawled to make identification difficult. But its implications were chilling. The message hinted at a conspiracy involving more than one person, and worse, it pointed a suspicious finger toward law enforcement. The phrase, "be next," suggested that whoever left the note felt threatened themselves, adding a new layer of danger and complexity to the investigation. The discovery of the note left the investigative team reeling. The theft of the patrol car and the message left behind indicated that someone within the police force, or someone with close ties to it, might be involved not only in Sonia's death, but also in efforts to intimidate or obstruct the investigation. For Nome's investigators, this development was both terrifying and galvanizing. It meant that Sonia's case was far from over. In fact, they might be on the brink of uncovering a deeper, more insidious network of betrayal. With suspicions now extending to potentially more than one officer, the police department was forced to confront the uncomfortable reality that they could be dealing with a conspiracy. The implications for the town were devastating. Investigators expanded their probe, re-examining every officer's actions on the night Sonia disappeared and cross-referencing every piece of evidence with renewed urgency. The stolen patrol car and the note were no longer just clues. They were harbingers of a case that threatened to unravel the very fabric of Nome's police force. After weeks of mounting evidence and extensive investigation, the case took a decisive turn when Officer Matthew Owens was formally arrested on suspicion of involvement in Sonia Ivanov's murder. The arrest sent shockwaves through Nome, a town that had long placed its trust in the local police force. As news spread, residents grappled with the unsettling realization that one of their own protectors had become a prime suspect in a brutal crime. Many found it hard to believe. Others had sensed something amiss long before. The arrest was a pivotal moment, signaling that investigators had gathered enough evidence to move forward. With Owens's inconsistent alibi, unexplained connections to the crime scene, and now the damning discovery of the stolen patrol car and threatening note, detectives had built a case too strong to ignore. Owens was taken into custody, but his arrest revealed far more than just the tragic story of Sonia Ivanov's death. It uncovered an undercurrent of fear and intimidation that had quietly taken hold of the town. As the community came to terms with Owens' arrest, a disturbing pattern of alleged misconduct began to surface. Over the following days, reports emerged from local women who claimed to have been victims of Owens' abuse of power. In interviews and sworn statements, these women described a troubling history of intimidation, verbal threats, and in some cases, physical assault at the hands of Owens. His status as a law enforcement officer had provided him with leverage and protection, enabling him to act with impunity for years. Accounts surfaced of him using his authority to frighten and coerce, creating a climate where women felt unsafe speaking out. For Nome's residents, these revelations deepened the community's sense of betrayal. Owens, who had once been viewed as a public servant, was now exposed as someone who had allegedly exploited his position to prey on vulnerable individuals. The stories painted a chilling portrait of a man who had not only violated the trust placed in him, but then also fostered a culture of fear among those he was supposed to protect. The arrest of Matthew Owens marked a turning point in Nome's story. What had begun as a single murder investigation had grown into a far-reaching examination of power, accountability, and the devastating effects of betrayal. The community's demand for justice for Sonia Ivanov now extended beyond a single case. It had become a call for healing and reform, a reckoning with the harsh reality that even those sworn to protect could harbor dark intentions. As the investigation into Matthew Owens intensified, detectives began digging into his personal history, revealing a complex and troubling portrait of the man at the center of Sonia Ivanov's murder case. Born and raised in Alaska, Owens had endured a difficult upbringing marked by poverty and a fractured family life. His father, a former military officer, was known for his strict discipline, a trait that often bordered on cruelty. Friends and family described Owens as a quiet, reserved child who grew up under a constant shadow of harsh rules and expectations. The demands of his upbringing seemed to forge in him a deep need for control and authority, traits he later carried into his professional life. Owens joined the Nome police force in his early 20s, initially seen as an asset to the small department. But as time passed, troubling patterns began to emerge in his behavior. Reports from former colleagues and supervisors revealed that Owens often handled cases involving domestic disputes or confrontations with an unusual level of aggression, even towards those who were vulnerable or frightened. While he was technically within his rights to enforce the law, his manner of doing so was heavy-handed, often instilling fear rather than respect. Over the years, whispers of his misconduct started to circulate. Multiple women in Nome shared stories of their encounters with Owens, describing experiences of intimidation, threats, and harassment. Some alleged that Owens had used his position to manipulate and control, taking advantage of his authority to discourage complaints. Most of these allegations never reached formal investigation stages, as the victims feared retribution from an officer they knew held substantial power within the community. It became evident that Owens had been able to exploit his position, creating an atmosphere where his misconduct went largely unchecked. The recent revelations following Sonia Ivanov's death exposed these patterns of behavior in a new light. His arrest and the allegations surrounding him painted a portrait of a man who had used his badge not to protect, but to control, fostering a quiet reign of terror. For Nome's residents, this was not just a case of one rogue officer, it was a stark reminder of the abuses that could flourish under the guise of authority. Owens's background and long history of misconduct had finally come to light, revealing motivations rooted in a desire for dominance and control, cultivated over years of unchecked behavior. As more individuals came forward with their stories, Owens's troubled upbringing and pattern of abuse became central to understanding his motivations. He was a man who had been given power and wielded it ruthlessly, turning his authority into a weapon. The investigation now transcended Sonia's case, becoming a reckoning for a community grappling with the profound betrayal of trust and the dark secrets that had been hidden behind a badge. As investigators delved deeper into Matthew Owens' life, they left no stone unturned in their pursuit of justice for Sonia Ivanov. One of the most significant breakthroughs came when they examined Owens's property more thoroughly, focusing on areas that could reveal traces of his involvement in the crime. Their search led them to a fire pit in his backyard, a seemingly ordinary spot that, upon closer inspection, became a pivotal piece of evidence in the case. Detectives and forensic analysts carefully sifted through the ashes and remnants in the fire pit, hoping to uncover any items that might connect Owens to Sonia. What they found was disturbing. Among the charred remains were small, identifiable fragments of Sonia's belongings. A half-burned piece of fabric, later matched to clothing Sonia was last seen wearing, and a set of partially melted keys were among the items retrieved. The keys, though damaged, still bore identifiable details that linked them to Sonia's apartment. These personal effects, hastily destroyed in an attempt to erase any evidence, provided a concrete connection between Owens and the victim. Each item pulled from the fire pit painted a grim picture of a cover-up. The burnt fabric suggested an attempt to dispose of any physical traces of Sonia, while the keys provided undeniable proof that something belonging to her had been in Owens's possession. Forensic analysis on these items, combined with DNA testing and witness accounts, helped build a compelling case against him. The discovery added an element of premeditation, suggesting that Owens had not only committed the crime, but also taken calculated steps to destroy evidence that could link him to it. With the charred items from the fire pit as critical evidence, investigators had what they needed to solidify the charges against Owens. These pieces were the final links in a chain of evidence, each item connecting him more directly to Sonia's murder. This new discovery brought both relief and sorrow to the community of Nome. Owen's actions had become chillingly clear, and the community, now faced with undeniable proof, came together in their grief and outrage, seeking justice for the young woman who had become a symbol of the town's shattered trust. The trial of Matthew Owens was one of the most anticipated events in Nome's history, drawing people from every corner of the community who came to witness justice being sought for Sonia Ivanov. The courtroom was packed with Sonia's grieving family, close friends, and townspeople, all eager to see the case through to its end. Owens, once a trusted officer of the law, now stood as the accused, his demeanor steely and unrepentant. The weight of the town's anger and sorrow hung heavily in the room, a silent reminder of the devastating impact his actions had on the community. The prosecution methodically laid out the case against Owens, beginning with witness testimonies that revealed his history of intimidation, misconduct, and abuse of authority. The prosecutor highlighted Owens's obsession with control, underscoring how he used his position to manipulate those he was sworn to protect. Women from the community who had previously stayed silent for fear of retribution took the stand, recounting their experiences of Owens's coercive tactics and threats. Each testimony added another layer to the portrait of a man who had long abused his power unchecked, slowly eroding the trust of those who once believed in him. Forensic evidence became the backbone of the prosecution's case. Analysts presented the key findings from the fire pit in Owens's backyard, displaying charred fragments of Sonia's clothing and her melted apartment keys as physical proof of his attempt to cover up his involvement in her death. DNA testing further solidified the case, identifying traces of Sonia's blood and personal items that linked her directly to Owens. The prosecutor emphasized the brutal premeditation behind Owens's actions, noting how he meticulously tried to erase any evidence that could tie him to the crime. Owens's defense attempted to cast doubt on the forensic findings, claiming contamination and misidentification, but their arguments were systematically dismantled by the prosecution's thorough preparation. The defense's case was weak, especially in the face of the overwhelming evidence of Sonia's belongings found in his fire pit and the absence of a verifiable alibi for Owens on the night of her murder. After days of witness testimony and forensic analysis, the jury was left with little room for doubt. When the time came for the jury to deliberate, it took less than 4 hours to reach a verdict. Matthew Owens was found guilty on multiple charges, including first-degree murder, abuse of authority, and obstruction of justice. The verdict was met with relief and somber satisfaction from Sonia's family and friends, who had waited for this moment with heavy hearts. During the sentencing, the judge delivered a powerful statement on the gravity of Owens' betrayal, condemning him for exploiting his role to harm the very people he was supposed to protect. The judge addressed the emotional damage inflicted on the community, acknowledging the sense of betrayal that permeated Nome and how Owens's actions had eroded the town's trust in law enforcement. Owens was sentenced to 21 years in prison, a sentence that ensured he would never again walk free. The lengthy sentence symbolized more than just punishment. It was a statement to the community and a reminder of the consequences of violating public trust. Sonia's family embraced, their faces a mixture of relief and sorrow, knowing that Owens would never again pose a threat to another person. As Owens was led from the courtroom, Nome took its first steps toward healing. The community was left to rebuild the sense of safety and trust that had been fractured, with Sonia's memory now a lasting symbol of resilience and the community's determination to uphold justice, no matter the cost. The tragic case of Sonia Ivanov and the shocking betrayal by Officer Matthew Owens sent ripples far beyond the small town of Nome, reaching Alaska's lawmakers who recognized the urgent need for reform. In response to the case and the community's calls for stronger accountability, the Alaska legislature introduced and ultimately passed the Sonia Ivanov Bill, a landmark piece of legislation aimed at addressing abuses of power within law enforcement. The Sonia Ivanov Bill mandates maximum sentencing for police officers convicted of murder or violent crimes while on duty, ensuring that any law enforcement officer who uses their position to harm civilians faces the most severe penalties. This legislation reflects the gravity of betrayal involved when a trusted public official commits such acts, underscoring Alaska's commitment to upholding justice and maintaining public trust in its law enforcement agencies. The bill was championed by both community advocates and state officials who recognized that Sonia's case was a tragic reminder of the need for greater accountability. By enforcing stricter penalties, the Sonia Ivanov bill aims to deter potential abuses within the police force and reaffirm Alaska's dedication to protecting its residents. The legislation has since become a powerful example for other states, highlighting the importance of safeguarding communities and preventing those in authority from exploiting their positions for harm. The murder of Sonia Ivanov and the arrest of Officer Matthew Owens left an indelible mark on the Nome community. What began as a tragic loss soon grew into a profound reckoning with the trust they once placed in their local law enforcement. For a town as close-knit as Nome, the betrayal was especially painful. Residents who had always felt safe in the presence of the police were now questioning the very system that had failed to protect one of their own. While the Sonia Ivanov bill represented a critical step toward justice and reform, the community's sense of safety and trust in law enforcement remains fragile. In the aftermath, Nome has rallied to honor Sonia's memory by strengthening its community bonds and advocating for transparency in its institutions. The town's resolve serves as a reminder of the importance of accountability and the need to uphold trust in those we count on for protection. Yet, the lingering question of how best to rebuild trust with law enforcement continues to shape local conversations, sparking new dialogues about oversight, responsibility, and community safety. If this story has resonated with you, I encourage you to share your thoughts on how communities can rebuild trust and prevent similar tragedies. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more in-depth explorations of true crime stories and the lessons they leave behind. Thank you for joining us in remembering Sonia and exploring the impact of her legacy.